Hi guys, and welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today I will be reviewing Boosh, An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham, book 3 of the Long Price Quartet. And guys, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Do you guys ever read a book that's in a series and the book was so good and what the book said was so good that it elevated the books that came before it? So prior to this book, I gave the first 2 books 4 stars because they were both excellent. I liked both of them. But this book, this freaking book, this third book, taken as a whole, viewing what the first 2 books were building to in this one, it just takes my view of those books and just like skyrockets it. So I definitely have to raise the rating of those. This is such a good book. So good. Like, I'm just going to start off by saying, guys, so good. So obviously there's going to be spoilers for the first 2 books because I have to, but there's not going to be spoilers for the third book here other than the premise of this book. So guys, remember, this takes place, the Long Price Quartet takes place, it follows the members of the Quartet, which is this Eastern-inspired, kind of Asian-inspired empire that consists of these loosely connected city-states that are each governed by a Kai, which is kind of like the king of that particular city. And each of these cities has this main, like, wizard/priest called a poet who has what's called an ondat, which is an abstract concept that has been bound to the poet and given human form. And that their job is to, one, assist in trade. That's how the Quartet cities have economic power, like the one from Shadow and Summer, Seedless. What he did was it was removing the part that continues. So he removed all the seeds from cotton in the cotton trade. I know, right? And so that's how they were able to produce and much more cotton and much faster, much less labor intensive than anyone else. So they had a leg up on the cotton trade. And as we saw in book 2, in Machi, where the main character Ota is from, they have stone made soft, and he can make stone soft. And so, like, it helps with mining because he just makes the mining veins really soft, and they can mine much more efficiently. But they can also, what protects them from this Western empire, the Galts, which is much more European and has kind of technology and steam technology, and the fact that they have the ondat protects them from the Galts because the Galts are terrified that the ondat will be turned onto them, and Stone Made Soft will have, like, mountains topple on them, and Seedless will have, like, removing the part that continues includes, like, human fetuses, so it would be able to remove any unborn children from the Galts, and so that kind of keeps the Galts in check. And so we have one society that is technologically advanced with steam power because it has to, because it doesn't really have any kind of magic. And then we have one that hasn't had a need to, it doesn't even have a military because it hasn't had a need for one because the ondat protect them. They don't need advanced technology because you don't need, for example, a cotton gin when Seedless just removes the seeds on its own. And so it's these 2 nations. We've heard about Galt. Galt's been trying to, like, bring down the ondat so that they can weaken the Quartet economically, but they'd want to do it secretly without being found out because of the fear of the ondat. So we've just heard about Galt before, but now Galt is one of the major players in this book. And Galt takes the form of one of my new favorite characters, an incredible character called Balasar Geis. What a cool freaking name. Balasar Geis is a Galtic general who is, they continue to remark on how short he is. He's like less than average height for a male, but has just this force of presence that just makes everyone want to follow him and follow him into battle no matter what he commands, because he just has this presence and this just bearing about him that inspires other people. And Balasar Geis, just from the prologue, Balasar Geis is determined to bring down the Qayet, because Balasar, as a 9-year-old, he watched the power of the Ondat turned against one of the Galtic cities that caused the floodwaters to rise, the river waters to rise and flood his town. And because he was from a noble family, they had a really rich, really expensive house, so they had multiple stories, and so they hid out on the roof while the whole rest of the town flooded, including his friends that were more poor, and his parents wouldn't let his friends come and take up safety in his house. And so he just remembers when the floodwaters receded and everyone was drowned and everyone died, and the pigs and the cattle. He just remembers just this horrible scene that was the result of the Ondat lashing out against a Galtic city. And so Gaius has led some of his closest troops, 20 of his closest men, he has led them into the lands of the old empire. In the Qayet's past, it had this great empire, but that great empire crumbled, and the world was kind of nearly destroyed because it was Ondat versus Ondat. These powerful beings warring, and it just kind of changed the landscape. And Gaius comes out of those lands of the old empire with it's him and 2 others. 17 of them died, and it's just bizarre how it describes how the landscape was changed by these old wars with the Ondat. They would be walking across ground that just ripped like paper and just plunged people into a never-ending pit. And all kinds of other horrible creatures that have been mutated by. It was just he doesn't describe it very long, but Gaius's recall is just horrifying in just a couple paragraphs. And Gaius is talking to his men, and he makes sure that his men knows that they're not doing this for money, they're not doing this for glory. He says that glory and money and fame, these are tools that you use to get people to do what they want. He said, with any of those things, I can get people to do anything I want. We are not doing this, and we didn't lose those 17 people just for that crap. We are doing it so that no one has these little pocket gods. And we just see the sheer revulsion that Gaius has for the idea that anyone, not Galt, not the Qayet, anyone should have these little pocket gods that are this powerful. No one should have that kind of power over civilization, and he is determined to bring down the Qayet. And Gaius thinks that he has a way to get rid of the Ondat among the cities of the Qayem. And so this is the first time that we really see anything from the Galtic perspective, and immediately Balasar Gaius is this extraordinarily interesting and sympathetic character. Now, going back to Machi, this book takes place 14 years after the last one, which, if you remember, took place 14 years after Shadow and Summer. So where Ota was 20 in Shadow and Summer, here, 28 years have passed, he is 48 years old and is now the Kai, or the king of the northern city of Machi. And also, our boy Mati, who's only a couple years younger than Ota, the failed poet Mati, who kind of found his place as librarian and kind of assistant to Samai, the poet in charge of Stone Made Soft in Machi. And so both Ota and Mati think differently than the other members of the Qayem, because they were both there at Saraket. They saw how terrible it can be when someone loses their Ondat. And so Ota is kind of building a militia that the Daikavo, which is, the head poet, and it was kind of the ostensible, kind of the pope of the Qayem. And other Qayem are getting freaked out because Ota's building a militia. He's just trying to be careful. He sees how terrible it would be if something happened to the Ondat, and Mati is trying to find a way, because when the Ondat are summoned, if the poet does it wrong, this horrible punishment is enacted on the poet. And so because of that, it takes forever. They gotta be really, really thorough with their summoning of the Ondat, just to be careful, because otherwise a horrible tragedy will befall the poet. Well, Mati thinks that he has discovered a way to prevent the poet from paying the price of a failed summon. And so he's kind of working on that just in case, and Ota is forming a militia just in case. And we see that Ota's just experiences growing up as a courier and working on the docks. He doesn't act like a typical Kai. He only has one wife, which is really unusual. unusual, and his wife is Kian, and he only has 2 children. The older one is a daughter named Aya, and then he has Danat, his younger son, who's going to take over for him, but his younger son is sickly, and so we see him having to worry about that as well. And other members of Machi, the other, like, noble families of the Utkayim in Machi are trying to get him to take other wives and have other kids, because the only successor that he has is freaking Danat. But him and his wife, they do not want to have another son, because remember, succession is not determined by oldest son. Succession among the Kayim is determined by which brother survives. They try to kill each other, and whichever one survives, that is the new Kai. Abraham probably does the passing of time that we weren't there for. I can't think of an author that does it better. 14 years have passed, and yet he drops hints, just little sentences, where we hear about just events that happened in the past that we weren't party to, but we still feel the emotion of those situations. He just writes so beautifully and eloquently, that with prose that says exactly what it needs to say, and is just as evocative as it needs to be. So he evokes just kind of this wistfulness and nostalgia or sorrow or emotional pain or joy that happened in that kind of break. And he doesn't go into this incredible detail of all the events that happened, but he gives us just enough to kind of know the kind of things that they went through that have shaped who they are today. And it's just so good. He does the same thing with a passage of time between books 1 and 2 as well. So this book is called An Autumn War, and as such, it is by far the most action-filled of the 3 Long Price Quartet books that I've read so far. And even it's still action that's more on a subdued level, even though there's war. So on the surface, this is a book about war, and we see the war from both sides, from Ota and Mati in the Kayet, and then Gais on the Galtic side. And Gais is so ruthless and so cruel when he feels that he needs to be. And yet, I found myself rooting for Gais, understanding where he's coming from. Now, understand that Gais wants nothing short of complete destruction. Gais wants the destruction of the Ondat and the destruction of anyone who can summon the Ondat. So Gais doesn't just want the Ondat gone, he wants all the poets killed, all the poets murked, and all the references to being able to summon an Ondat burned. Gais has essentially declared a holy war on the Kayem. He is willing to sacrifice anything and everything to make sure that nobody from now till the end of time ever has the kind of power that is embodied within the Ondat. And he's rolling the dice, because if this fails, he's ruined. He won't just lose his life. If he doesn't lose his life, he'll lose everything that he has. This is a huge roll of the dice, but he feels like it is something that is worth fighting for. And you understand where he's coming from. The Ondat are too freaking powerful. Like, the fact that they could level countries at a whim, they're too powerful. But is Gais taking it a step too far? These are the kind of things that Abraham has you wrestling with in this book. And in this war, we see from characters who aren't prepared for war, who have read stories about war, where war is this kind of glorified thing in these old stories. Abraham does a fantastic job, really right up there with Poppy War and Sword of Kaigen, where no one really understood what war is really like. And here we see what war is like from the civilian perspective, and from people who have no experience at all. And it's nothing like the stories where in the stories you expect to see this hail of arrows, like in the story of Thermopylae, where we'll fight in the shade, where there's just this huge cloud of arrows that blocks out the sun.
Our arrows will blot out the sun. Then we will fight in the shade.
But really, arrows are unseen. They just kind of appear in people. They go from here to there, and it's over like that. How battles are incredibly quick. People die fast. That it's incredibly loud. Abraham describes these 2 armies clashing with the sound of falling buildings, which I thought was just, having never witnessed a battle, I could picture that horrible sound and just how loud it would be, and just how horrible. He He does not in any way pull his punches for how brutal and cruel and horrible war is for really everybody involved, from the top to the people commanding the armies to the people who have the unfortunate task of just being on the wrong side of a conquering force. The Long Price Quartet always discusses the price of things. Geis is fighting this war, and the price of the price of safety for the rest of the world, with there being no Ondat. There is no price too high. Whatever the price is, he is willing to pay it. Others are forced to ask what the price of safety is. Some characters lament that they too will do anything to protect their own, safety for their own. They wish that they lived in a world where it wasn't a choice between their children and our children. And I just thought that was so good. No one likes the death of children. No one likes the death of innocence. But if the cost of protecting yours, keeping your innocence safe, would you pay the price of having to harm their innocence? And there's no real clear answer. It discusses, like other books, like the Poppy War really deals with this, like where one side is committing the exact same atrocities that the other side is trying to inflict upon them. Where hurt this one, it's a crime, but kill those guys and it's heroism. Why is killing our people criminal and horrific and barbaric, but killing their guys, that's heroic? And so it's two sides of the same coin, and this message about war and this discussion about war would not be nearly as effective if we didn't also see it from the side of the Gaults. If we just saw it from the Kaiates being invaded and being at war with Gault, it would not be nearly as effective if we did not have Geis and his guys' perspective. Continuing to ask, what would you do to protect your own? Would you sacrifice some of yours? Would you sacrifice people close to you if it saved thousands or tens of thousands more? And then sometimes our desire to keep our own safe end up putting them in further danger. I think we can all relate to this on the level of sometimes when you try to help, when you try to fix something, you end up making it worse. And we have that here, but on a much more fatal or lethal kind of scale. So even though this book is about war, what it is at its heart is a much more quiet, intimate tale, and this is what Abraham does so incredibly well. At its heart, this is a story about relationships and about parenting, about loyalty and dignity and what the nature of responsibility is. Abraham writes such realistic parents in here. Parents of all kinds. Parents of children that were born to them or of their blood. Parents who are the only ones there as opposed to being blood related. And the children they're not super annoying. They act like children, so they are irresponsible and strong-willed, but they're not that annoying child trope, because they're having to deal with really, really harsh and difficult situations. Like they're in the middle of two countries at war, and so they're struggling to reconcile their youth with their responsibility. What is their job in these circumstances? And yet we still have to see these other characters parent them and scold them and be kind to them. And if you're an important person like Ota, what does that do with your relationship with your children? Is there anything you wouldn't do to protect your children and keep them safe? The relationships and the loyalty between all of these characters, between Ota and his wife and his the captain of his militia, Sinja, and Liat returning from the past, and Mati and Semai. And all of these characters' relationships they are so three-dimensional. These characters are fantastic, and the relationships between them, the complex nuances between all of these characters that are just developed in these quiet moments and then drawn out when the rubber meets the road, when these big things happen. Abraham, I don't know how he does it, but they're just so brilliant. Daniel Abraham writes these quiet, intimate, yet incredibly tense and dread-filled scenes like nobody else. I don't know any other author that just ratchets up the tension and has, like, it can be just cut through with a knife, and yet they're just two people in a room talking about things, and it's just so tense and so anxiety-inducing. I don't know anybody that writes these small, intimate, intense scenes, just like the conclusions of both Betrayal in Winter and Shadow in Summer. The female characters in this book especially are just really, really well done and really strong and three-dimensional. They are bound by the societal rules that are upon them. The Quartet is absolutely a patriarchal society, but these women are still shown as intelligent and independent, and they flourish in the roles that they must take. There are certain roles they can't have, but the roles that they find to aid their friends and their family and their country are no less important than the roles of the men. And the fact that they're able to be strong despite the attitude that kind of the Quartet has toward women. They're just really, really great characters with their own dreams and their own motivations separate from the men that they may be in relationship with. So Abraham is also a master of presenting us with something that's going to happen. He makes it very clear where the story is headed. And he just lets the dread build because you see where it's going. And you're like, no, we got to stop this runaway train. Like, we're going to stop this train at some point, right? Like, we're going to stop the train. Like, we see the destination. We do not want to reach that destination. And we are sitting there hoping and praying that our characters are going to find a way out of the inevitable. And the tension and the anxiety and the dread just builds and builds toward a conclusion where you think you know where it is headed. He does this in Shadow in Summer, he does this in Betrayal in Winter, and he does it again. And here, the conclusion of this book, Abraham, there's a reason that if you read the Goodreads reviews or read any reviews, people hail, this book is unbelievable. I've never read anything like the conclusion, the ending parts of this book. Abraham does something that I didn't think authors were allowed to do. Like, you would never think that this is where the book is going. You just wouldn't. There's no way reading this book, you're like, oh my gosh, it's heading this place. And there's like one of two places it's gonna head. And you're trying to like reconcile yourself to be okay with either one. And then neither of those things happen. What happens is so, I can't even describe it. The Long Price Quartet is Shakespearean in its tragedy and sorrow, but while also providing like hope within that. And the conclusion of this book is like nothing that I've ever seen before. It is shocking, and I don't know what to say about it. But what this book says about grief and tragedy and sorrow and hope, I can't. You have to read this book for yourself. And this is where all of the first two books they were leading to this point. They were always leading to this point. And this is why, even if you don't love the first book, or you don't love the second book, taken as a whole, like this series, more than any other series I've read, really needs to be treated as one long story. Because what the first two books set up makes this third book so incredibly powerful. It's just amazing. Guys, it's so blew my mind. It's just so incredibly amazing. I cannot recommend this series enough. I am so excited to start Price of Spring and see what the conclusion. I've read not what happens, but I've read the synopsis, the back of the book, and I already don't want to read it because please don't do this. I'm screaming at the characters. Do not do what you were thinking of doing in the fourth book. Oh my gosh. Guys, this freaking series is so good. If I had read this last year, this series would absolutely have been on my top 10 series, and this would have been on my top 10 books. Like, Autumn War is fantastic. So good. On the Kingfin approval system, I give this book a superb plus, without a doubt. Hands down, a superb plus. I loved this book so much and what it did and its conclusion taken as a whole. Like, if I was to take Shadow and Summer all the way through here, I would almost give An Autumn War a superb plus. That's how incredibly moved I was by this book. Oh, so incredibly good. Obviously, out of 5 stars, I give it 5 stars. Guys, go read the freaking Long Price Quartet. Like, I don't understand why the internet is sleeping on this series. I don't understand why this is not like a runaway smash hit all-time classic. It's because y'all read the first book and you're like, yeah, it's boring. Guys, the cotton trade is more interesting than you think it is. So guys, that's all I have for you today. I will be happy to report very, very quickly as soon as I finish Price of Spring. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, information about my Discord and Patreon, if you want to support what I do here, is down in the description. And guys, I will see you next time. Go read Long Price Quartet.